Kancha, papastem tsikason. So hello, my name's Whitehorse. Thanks for joining me today. Today I'm here with my friend, Kevin Emard. And today we're going to be talking all about bows and bow hunting. Because for myself, I grew up just hunting with a rifle, 22, shotgun, and the bigger rifles as I'm out hunting. And in the previous videos or some of the other videos, you'll see the moose and the elk and those other animals that we've harvested. We hunted them with a rifle. So I've invited Kevin to come with me and to talk to us about hunting with a bow and actually teaching me about using a bow, because I've never used a bow. However, I've always wanted to, because traditionally that's what our tapans, our mosomnanak, nokomnanak, that's what they hunted with a bow and with a spear. But I've always wanted to learn about that type of hunting, because with rifle hunting that I've done my entire life, there's a certain way that we track the animals and that we hunt those animals, because we actually don't have to get very close to those animals, because with, say, muswa, wawaskisu, apsamosis, we can actually take a shot at them from a long distance, like up to outside of 100 yards. So we don't actually have to get very close to the animal. However, with bow hunting, you actually have to get much closer, because, of course, the arrow is not going to fly as far as a rifle bullet will. So I've invited Kevin just to talk about the differences between hunting with a rifle and hunting with a bow. Because myself, when I go out, if I spot an animal at 100 yards or 100 plus yards, I'll take a shot at it and harvest it. However, I can't even imagine trying to take a shot at a moose at 100 yards with a bow. So I've invited Kevin here just to talk about the differences. Of course, with a rifle, when I'm hunting, I have to know my animal, but just very generally, I have to know where it eats, where it goes for a drink of water, where it beds down, but just very generally, so I don't have to sneak up on that animal. But I still have to know those things about, say, muswa. I have to know where it eats, just so I can get into that general direction and get within say 100 yards that range from it. And 100 yards is a long way for those that really don't know distances. Say a power pole length or 2 power pole lengths. That's the range that you can shoot a moose at with a rifle. But with a bow, it's much different. So Kevin, maybe you want to talk a little bit about that sort of thing, and the knowing your animal and the distances you have to get to with a bow.
Okay. Well, you still have to know the basics, which you were talking about, which is, yeah, you have to understand where the animals like to hang out, where they normally eat, where they drink. With the bow, it's a little bit different, because you have to get in a lot closer, so you have to actually study the animal a little bit more. You have to try to figure out what his tendencies are, where he likes to travel. A lot of times they're in this area, they travel alongside the creeks, and I'm sure you know that already. But it's you have to actually go out and explore. You can't stay too close to the cut lines. You have to go walking and figure out the animal very closely. For instance, what I hunt with is traditional archery gear, and that's recurves longbows. I used to hunt with a self bow, which is made out of a tree by itself. When I was a kid, I started off with rabbits. But so what I've learned about the moose is when they like to walk through an area, you get to know which times and how. They have sort of like a little circuit. So I don't know, it could be up to a few hundred yards, and it could keep going up to a few kilometers, and it's not just a straight, it's like square kilometers, right? So you kind of get to know their route, and they have little telltale signs of when we're hunting, so you'll follow them. You follow the tracks as best you can. Sometimes you lose them because the grass is a little bit too tall, or you go through an area that it's really hard to track, but you just keep trying. And then you'll find where they have these little rubs and their rut pits, and then they go, and it's basically kind of like a zigzag pattern all over the place, but it's the same pattern over and over and over again. They keep doing this. So once you figure out that pattern, then all you have to do from there is try to figure out which days that he goes by a certain area that you can hunt him. Because you have to try to figure out a spot where you're going to be concealed enough, but you have to have also, the area has to have enough room where you can shoot your arrow. And you have to be on the downwind side. And here the prevailing winds come out of the west. So when you set up, it's good to set up somewhere where it's not too far from water, because they like to eat that the water, the food that's under the water. And then you can just sit there and call, or you can try to stalk them, and I prefer to call. So far I've taken 3 moose with a bow. First one I ever did was with a compound. And the second one I ever took was with a recurve, and then the third one I took was with a recurve as well. The first one I ever shot was with a compound, and that one was probably about 35 yards, maybe 40. And the second one I shot was with the recurve, and that one was a lot closer. I think that one was maybe somewhere between 15 and 17 yards. Kind of scary. And the third one I shot was also with a recurve. The difference is with a compound, a lot of people can shoot out to 60, 70 yards, and they have little sights and a peep. It's kind of like the old 303s. So they have a peep sight on there, and it's basically when you set it, then you can, as long as you have a rangefinder. I brought one of those right here. So if you have a rangefinder with you, it tells you the distance. So when you get to a certain distance, then you know exactly which pin to use. And it's mechanical, so you pull back for a certain distance, and then it lets off, and then it becomes easy. Then you can just hold it like that.
So I guess that's another difference between a rifle and bow hunting. With a rifle, if it's, say, 100 yards or within, I don't have to use a rangefinder. I could just, because normally my rifle is sighted for 100 yards, so I could just lift and pull the trigger. But with a bow, you need to know that range.
Yeah, it's set up that way because if you don't know the range, then you choose the wrong pin on a compound and you shoot over or under the animal. Or sometimes you could end up wounding it if you shoot it in a spot that's not the vitals. The arrows are different too between a compound and a traditional bow. Your compound bows, a lot of people like to shoot somewhere between 350 grains, which is the weight of the total arrow. And some people go up to 450, 500, but not too many people go above that. With a traditional bow, I like to go above that. For me, a light arrow in traditional is 550 grains, which is actually fairly heavy. My regular arrows that I really like to shoot are somewhere around 650, and it gives you a lot of penetration, and the broadheads are completely different too. When you're shooting with a compound, you could use what's called a chisel cut or a punch cut, which has I guess you could say the best way I could describe it is like the old Romans. They used to have a type of arrow that would punch into armor and things like that, but the blades on them are no good these days.
So that's with, when you're talking about the grain size, that's the weight of the overall arrow, right? The head? of the arrow?
That's the whole arrow together.
So I know with on a rifle, when we're talking about grain size on a rifle, if you have a heavier grain, you've got less range with your bullet. But with a lighter grain, you've got more range, but less penetration of an animal. So a heavier grain, and how they measure with rifle bullets anyway, is that it's sand grain. So they're measuring the amounts of sand grain. So when we say 150 grain bullet, that's how many sand grains equal the weight of the head of that bullet that actually goes into the animal. So with rifles, when we have a heavier grain, more penetration with the animal. But if we've got a lighter grain, less penetration, but that bullet flies farther because it's lighter. So it must be similar with an arrow?
Yeah, it's basically the same principle. That's why a lot of the compound guys use the lighter arrows, because they think that the faster the arrow is, the harder that it hits, but that's contradictory. There's a study out there by a guy named, I can't remember his first name, but his last name is Ashby, and he has a study out there about arrow penetration and what it takes to actually penetrate large animals like buffalo and rhino and elephant. So if you use his principles, and that's what I've been using, and I've had some really good success. Like that moose that I had shot, I had gone clean through him with my arrow, and I was shooting 50-pound recurve, and the arrow at that time was 675 grain, and he says that the threshold for breaking big bone on an animal is 650. That's why I stay around 650. But also one of the differences too is with the compound, a lot of guys like to use between 10 and usually about 12 to 15 forward of center, which is you take the center of the arrow and the balance point on it is about anywhere from 10 to 15 percent forward of the center. But with traditional archery, you want that to be a lot more. So you want it to be somewhere around 30%. And my broadheads are actually, I use a cut-on contact broadheads for my traditional stuff. And I like to use at least 250 grain broadheads or 300 or 325, depending on what I'm doing. And right now I'm shooting a 3-blade VPA, I think they're called. It's a very tough broadhead. It can go through bone, but with if I'm going after moose, because I went after deer, right? So when I'm going after moose, I use a 2-blade single bevel, and what the single bevel does is it creates a little bit of a twisting action when it goes into the animal, and when it hits a bone, it's kind of like a wedge. So it'll actually, when it hits the bone and goes into the bone, it puts a torque on it, and then it makes the bone split, and then that creates better penetration for your arrow.
So I guess back to the hunting basics of between the rifle and the bow, especially in terms of how our ancestors, what they had to deal with and what they had to learn about with the animal movements and learn about making their job of harvesting an animal easier. What about stuff like game trails or even say setting up a stand and going into a tree or something like that? How does that make harvesting easier?
Well, when you follow the game trails, it's usually the does that are the ones that go up and down on the game trails, and that's what you're looking at when you see an area and it has a game trail, and the game trail is well used. Once in a while, the males will use those, but mostly they go on the downwind side and they use that. So they'll use the prevailing winds to be able to scent check. So every time that they step, they have a gland in between their hooves. And on a deer, it's called interdigital gland. I don't know what they call it on moose, and elk, but they all have that. So what they do is that when they're walking, they leave the scent every time they step. So what the male does is he'll walk on a downwind side. Sometimes it's 5 yards. Sometimes it's up to 25 yards, depending on the terrain. So as what our job is to do is to figure out these animals, and then when you find a good game trail, and then you walk off of the game trail on the downwind side of the prevailing winds, and you check, and you'll see a faint trail, and then you know, okay, the animal's using this. So we have game cameras now, but back in the old days, they didn't have that. So what they had to do is they had to go back day after day after day in order to figure out when this animal was coming. And it was basically, okay, you know where the animal is, but you don't know when it's going to show up. That's how come they had so many hunters in the tribe. That's how come they had so many warriors, because everybody had a job to do.
Yeah, I remember watching a video from way back. I think it was done with Ojibwe Cree moose hunt, and at the time they were using a spear. But what they had to do was actually track the moose down, and they tracked it for like 4 days, learning from that moose its behaviors, when it would lay down, where it would go to eat, and they followed it for 4 days before they actually came up with a strategy on how they were going to spear this moose. And this video was made back in like the 1930s or 40s, but they documented how they, like 4 days of tracking this moose down with a spear till they came up with a plan, and it actually shows them finally catching up to this moose while it was laying down. But that's because they were watching it, waited till it got nice and full eating, and then it went to go lay down, and that's when they snuck up on it and managed to spear it. So I guess it's sort of the same sort of thing, especially with a bow, where you really got to learn lots about the animal that you're hunting and really watching it and taking care of, like we said earlier, watching where it eats, watching where it waters, watching its habits before you can harvest it.
Yeah, another thing too is that you get to know the animal's different tracks compared to other animals, because they all have, it's kind of like a fingerprint, right? So that takes a while to learn, but when you learn it, then you get to know, then you can follow one single animal instead of coming across a bunch of animals and trying to figure out which one's which. What you were talking about with the guys with the spear long ago, we call that walking an animal down. And I've done that a couple times with deer, and it's really hard to get close to an animal, so they had to be very stealthy back then. Of course, they also had what they would call, I don't know, kind of herding the animal, so that way you'd kind of chase it towards a few people that were already set up. And that's how they used to hunt with the spear back then too.
Perfect. So now we've learned the difference between hunting with a bow and hunting with a rifle, and now we're going to start to look at the different bows and the different arrows, and getting into those specific things about bows, because of course we need to understand the weapon, and that is the bows. And the reason for doing that is taking a step back and looking at our musumnanak, nukumnanak, tapananak, what they had to go through, and what they had to work with when they were out harvesting and living off the land. So with our next video, we'll explore a little bit the different bows out there, and look at that kind of weapon that our ancestors had. So thanks, Kevin.
Well, I'd like to say a couple more things. They used to take pilgrimages from around here, so they'd go down towards Yellowstone. They'd go get volcanic glass or rocks or chert, and then they used to be able to fashion their own broadheads out of that. And a lot of that stuff was serrated, and some of them were even single bevel. So they already knew long time ago And their shafts that they used to put the arrowhead on the larger side of the stick that they use, so it tapered down. So that also helps a lot with penetration too. So when the broadhead would go into the animal, it created less friction as the taper of the shaft was. So they didn't have to have as heavy bows as we do nowadays. You could get by with a 40-pound, which was very common back then. 45. Back then, a heavy bow was 50 pounds.
Interesting, interesting. So you're talking about the draw weight, right?
Yep.
Yeah, not the weight of the bow itself.
No.
The
Yeah, it's
draw weight on it.
so what you get for everybody's draw weight is a little bit different because unless it's with a compound, because it has what they call a back wall. So when there's a back wall on it, you pull it all the way back and then it'll stop, and you can't pull it anymore. That's what your back wall is, and that's set at a certain draw length. With the recurves, there is no back wall, but you can only pull them so far within the manufacturers or the design of the bow. If you pull it farther than that, you break it.
Interesting. Good, good. So like I said, now we're going to start to, from here we're going to go on and start to look at different types of bows and different types of arrows and the heads on them. So again, thanks Kevin for this portion, and we'll hope to see you in the next section.